Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's session. Just a little bit of updates before we start today's session. Number one is ICE Task 4 is obviously due today by 23:59. I did send another announcement out that if you have not done ICE Task 1, 2, and 3, I'm giving you until latest tomorrow. There is a deadline on getting all of the grading done, and that's by Monday. So I need to obviously spend the weekend to finish all of the grading. Number two, I have completed recording your Learning Unit 8, which is on capacity. I'm just waiting for the download for me to load that on for you, so you'll have it basically between today and tomorrow. Number three, we only have post today. We will only have one more learning unit left, which is Learning Unit 10, which is a pre-recorded session. So it will be next week's session, which I'll record and then load it on for you. And then we're done in terms of content. The 31st of October is basically our last session. I will post an announcement. The 31st is number one, Halloween, and number two, it's falling on the day of Diwali, which I'm pretty sure some of our students will be celebrating. Therefore, I'm going to use that session as a sort of pre-recorded session as opposed to a live lecture. The reason being, obviously, everyone will be celebrating, or most of everyone will be celebrating, including myself. I will be using that last session as a national support session recording. So please make sure that you listen to that just on preparation with your final POE, what to focus on, what not to focus on. And then if you have anything that you're struggling with in terms of concepts with understanding, if you can just either send me a WhatsApp, send me a voice note, or drop me a mail and just tell me, okay, I'm struggling with a specific theme or specific learning unit, and I'm happy to just share that information with the rest of the class, and then go over that as a part of revision. And then that will obviously bring us to the tail end of our lectures for the semester before your actual final POE is due. So today our focus is going to be on scheduling and short-term scheduling. So I'm just going to go dive right in there. And as far as the POE goes, this specific learning unit, there's not much from this learning unit. It's a nice to know because we're bringing in examples in terms of your other learning units, or bringing examples from this learning unit into your POE that belongs to other learning units. It does 100% help. It also helps with understanding, especially if you're going into a production or a manufacturing facility or organization. So what is short-term scheduling? So it's generally used in operations and production management settings, and it refers to the process of planning and controlling the assignment of resources, whether it's resources like people, machines, materials. It also goes over a specific time frame. It either ranges from, because it's short term, it either ranges from a few hours to anything up to a few weeks or a few months. And the goal of short-term scheduling is to, number one, enhance the efficiency within your production or manufacturing facility. You want to minimize as much delays as possible. And also you want to be able to meet your target in a very short period of time. So that's where scheduling comes from. As we go on throughout the lecture, I will be sharing certain examples when it comes to scheduling. And how we use that in our everyday function, whether you know it or you don't know it, it's basically something that is used. So some of the features of scheduling is resource allocation. So it's allocating specific resources, whether it's a employee, a worker, any sort of equipment, to specific jobs or to specific tasks. So if you have someone that's a machinist, it's not allocating them within a specific time frame to a specific machine, and you schedule them according to that, whether it's a night shift, day shift, etc. It's now allocating that specific resource to a specific task. Time optimization. So it allows, when you do scheduling, it allows your time to be used as efficiently as possible, so that you don't have a lot of downtime, and your workflow in terms of your operations or your production is very smooth, and you have a pretty good stable workflow. The next one is prioritization. So the decisions with prioritization is basically made depending on which tasks or jobs should be done first. Um, so if there's a specific deadline on a job, you would prioritize that. If there's a job size, meaning something's pretty big, maybe you'll prioritize that. Maybe it's in you prioritizing according to revenue or rand value. Or you're prioritizing in terms of what is available in terms of your resources. Maybe it's a raw material that's available, and maybe another element of a raw material is not available for another job card. So you probably leave that one out and concentrate on the ones that is available. Flexibility, because it's short-term scheduling, you can make adjustments pretty quickly, and you can be very quick in terms of your response to any sort of last minute changes, especially if your demand changes. If you have a breakdown in the machinery, maybe you have 5 employees off for a particular day, so you have a resource problem, and you don't have resources available. So it's how quickly can you now change your scheduling in order for you to still maintain that efficiency within your business and within your production facility. Then we have job sequencing. So job sequencing is sequencing your jobs according to what needs to be processed first. It's like a first come first serve situation, depending on how your business is operating. Or are you doing your shortest job first, or you're doing your longest job first, or you're doing your priority jobs first? So it's sequencing your jobs according to that and scheduling your sequence jobs according to that. Okay, so I think it's self-explanatory. It's something that you can understand pretty easily and pretty quickly. The next one we want to speak about is constrained work centers. So constrained work centers is basically any sort of bottlenecks and our workstations, production steps, or resources within a specific production process that has a limited capacity compared to the demand that's placed on. Sorry, I don't know what happened there. Compared to the demand that's placed on them. So a lot of these constrained work centers specifically, it restricts your overall sort of throughput of the entire system, because they cannot handle the required volume at the same rate that other parts of your work centers can. So it's the one that constrained, basically, and that's exactly what a constrained work center is. Some of the features here is limited capacity. So your constrained work centers basically have a slower processing rate, or maybe they don't have as much resources as your other work centers. Maybe there's a limited supply of resources or labor. Maybe there's you don't have enough raw materials, or you have older machines that do not work as fast as your newer machines. So it makes it basically the slowest point of your workflow. So if you're going through a production process and it's a sort of a repetitive job process, then at one specific stage, because you are lacking in terms of raw material or machinery or labor, that becomes sort of your limited capacity. Any bottlenecks in production. So since it sort of limits the rate in which products can flow through your constrained work center, there's often delays, you end up waiting quite long in terms of your time frame, and then there ends up being sort of inefficiency because there's bottlenecks, meaning that you cannot actually progress further, or something's hampering you from going further. So your impact on throughput, your sort of production capacity is determined by the output of that specific work center. So even if your other processes or your other work centers, can work pretty fast, they have the state-of-the-art new machinery, a full workforce available, the basis of it is the system is only as fast as its slower points. So you need to take that into consideration. Resource prioritization. So because you have now constraints, you need to pay very special attention to how you now are scheduling your items and how you're managing your constrained work centers. So it means you need to prioritize your work a little bit better. You need to reduce as much downtime and also try and combat or minimize any bottlenecks within your production process. Workload balancing. So managing this constrained work center means that you are adjusting your operations, whether it's an upstream operation or a downstream operation, to make sure that your specific bottleneck in that constrained work center is not overwhelmed because you have too much of work, and it's also not sitting idle waiting for any sort of raw material. So you need to have some sort of a balanced flow to work through the bottleneck. Continuous improvement focus. You obviously, a lot of businesses, what they try and do is they focus or they target your constrained work center. So how they can better improve the process, what more resources do they need, how can they improve from a technology advancement or an upgrade perspective, just so they can alleviate that specific bottleneck. So you end up with an overall system capacity. So every organization, even if it's not within a production or a manufacturing setting, every organization has a constrained work center. So it's a work center that obviously ends up being a lot slower than the rest of the process. Like for instance, within a logistics setting, if you are, let's say, sending a parcel from point A to point B, in the logistics industry, we call it the life cycle of a parcel. If in one of the stages there is a constrained work center, the entire process basically ends up being a lot slower, a lot harder to now manage and stick to SLAs. The process becomes inefficient, and therefore you end up having unsatisfactory customers. So it's understanding where you now need to put your emphasis in order for you to continue a balanced work life. Okay. Limitations when it comes to scheduling. So when you scheduling, some of the techniques used, you need to be able to manage your resources and you need to optimize your operations as much as possible. So there is certain limitations, and one of it is uncertainty with your inputs. So this is when your demand becomes very varied or variable, and you relying on what your forecasted demand is going to be or how long it's going to take in terms of your duration of that specific task. And it sometimes is not always accurate. There can be sudden changes with customer orders. A customer may want their order a lot quicker than what was anticipated or promised. So it can disrupt your scheduling quite heavily. If one of your equipment fails, if you have an unforeseen sort of machine breakdown, any malfunctions with equipment, etc., it can also throw off your scheduling. And also, if you don't have staff available, absenteeism, a big thing. If you have skill mismatches, which is very common in the workplace, you have a particular machine that somebody's working on, and then that person is not available. You're putting someone from machine Z to work on machine A, and they actually don't know how to operate it, or their skills don't match it. So a lot of these workforce fluctuations can affect your ability to execute a good schedule. So it doesn't always run as planned. Complexity. So with complexity is, you have large data sets, based on the number of jobs and the resources, and as a constraint sort of increase, the complexity of your scheduling then, becomes a much larger than life. So different techniques like using Gantt charts, which I'm going to go through, becomes very difficult to manage, especially in a large scale operation. So that's when you need sort of advanced software, you need something to help you to make your scheduling as efficient as possible. Lack of flexibility. So some of the techniques used when you're scheduling, like a fixed schedule, for instance, it doesn't allow for any sort of adjustments once your schedule is fixed or set. So in environments where it's pretty dynamic and it changes quite often, um, if you're lacking some sort of flexibility, it can lead to a lot of inefficiency within your production and manufacturing process. It can lead to downtime because you actually don't know how to fix a fixed schedule, basically. And then resource constraints, if you have an unbalanced workforce, any sort of bottlenecks, or even if you have limited visibility, you need to be able to understand, what's your interdependency between various tasks, what is your availability of your critical resources like your raw materials, your machines, etc. So this is just some of the limitations with it. You can understand that your limitations end up being a lot more than what you've sort of preempted. It could be like, for instance, before we move on to the next slide, some of the examples, like for instance, if you are in a let's say healthcare, okay, and we're talking scheduling right now. If you're in a hospital, you can use, and we're looking at something, let's say like an operating room schedule. So you use different scheduling techniques to allocate various operation rooms based on your urgency of a particular surgery. So what is the surgeon's availability? What is the amount of time that they need for that specific surgery or procedure? Your high priority procedures, like emergency procedures, are then it may bump off less critical procedures. Even if you have to shift it from a operating room to like a patient room, or a patient appointment, like let's say a doctor's room, for instance, your appointments are scheduled to make sure that you minimize your patient's waiting time while you're balancing your doctor's availability. So a lot of doctors' rooms use like block scheduling, which is very similar to like having an appointment. So they group together in terms of efficiency. So the doctor may say, okay, I'm going to do from 8 to 12 as block scheduling or block appointments. And these are people that are like routine follow-ups. Maybe it's appointment sets. And then maybe from like 12 to 4, 12 to 5 o'clock, I'm going to do walk-ins. So they would schedule their time according to their availability. Or very similar within their, let's say, the transportation network and logistics sector. So with the airline, like an airline flight scheduling, your airline creates schedules for a flight so that you can, the aircraft is basically utilized as fully as possible, and you can also reduce your turnaround time. So your flight schedules take into account what airport is available, what is the maintenance, what is the fuel capacity, what is the connecting flights, etc. So all of that now needs to be linked in order for your airport scheduling to take place. Similarly, if you're a courier company, you schedule your delivery routes for your specific drivers so that you don't have excessive fuel costs, and also you stick to your delivery times. So if you're using something like a route optimization software, the software basically schedules your deliveries because it then clusters specific destinations together, and then it tries to avoid high traffic areas as well. So it's something that's a link to it's linked to like a Google Maps or a Waze or something, and then it would be able to route optimize you the best possible way. And that's just, certain examples. Also, let's say, for instance, in a like IIE situation or IIE context, if you're a student and let's say there's a classroom scheduling, so in a university setting, your schedule basically assigns different classrooms based on the availability of a lecturer, what is the course size, what equipment is needed, etc. So let's say, for instance, if it's a large class, and I'm talking this more from a face-to-face perspective, they're scheduled in bigger lecture halls. If it's something that's has to do with scientific or biological, maybe it's scheduled within a lab using that specific equipment. If we have to go into exam scheduling, your like different universities, they schedule your final exam to ensure that you do not overlap with another exam. It's everything is evenly distributed within that exam period so that you minimize conflicts. Also, the way that it's scheduled, it's also giving the student, enough time to have some sort of study time before papers. I remember when I was in university, at some point in a semester, I had a paper in the morning and a paper in the afternoon. I mean, that killed me completely. But if there's better scheduling and understanding that if you're doing a Bachelor of Commerce degree, you have 6 specific modules in a semester. That 6 specific modules, you may have a paper 1 or a paper 2 or whatever it is. Microeconomics, macroeconomics. You can't have it both scheduled on one day. You need to have a day and then hopefully a break for a day or two and then another paper. So it's really looking at things properly before you're actually going ahead and you're scheduling it. All right. Okay. So we move on to a Gantt chart. Okay. So a Gantt chart is very commonly used when it comes to scheduling. So it basically gives you a visual representation of a project from start to finish, how your tasks overlap, when it should be completed, in terms of duration, and what tasks are dependent on another. So I put an example here, and this is a project that I did for my NQF level 9 IDP, and we had to do a Gantt chart for our project. And this is just to sort of pinpoint exactly the different phases that go into it and how the phases then overlap each other. So as much as this is an illustration, there's also a written work that would go with it. And even when you are bringing this into the workplace specifically, when you are asked to do scheduling in a Gantt chart, let's say you give apologies, it seems like I just quickly shifted offline. Okay, so and for a specific project, you need to obviously lay down every single task with a time frame and what forms part of the task. Like for instance, for example, okay, let's say you are asked to do a website development on a specific website for the organization that you are now part of. You need to now list down your tasks. Like the first one probably will be like research and planning. That will be technically phase one. You need to give a timeline. And what do you do in research and planning? Probably analyzing different market trends. What is the goals of your website? What is the vision? What is the mission? What do you plan or what do you intend on receiving out of it? Maybe it's a e-commerce website development. So are you expected to then sell what products on it? What is the different SKUs? What platform are you using, etc. Then you need to mock up your design. That may be phase two, also with the time frame around it. What is your wireframes? What is your design layout? What is your color specific that you need to put in there? And sort of now when you look at dependency on another, your phase two on designing your mockup basically can only start after your research and planning or research and development is completed. Then number three will be, or phase three, will be developing a backend system. What is your database? What is your server configuration? What is the APIs? What API or integration can you do with the logistics company? And your dependency here, it can only start after you've done research and planning, and it can run parallel to your design mockup. Then phase four can be develop your front end. What do you want it to say when a consumer or a customer ends up, in front of your website? You need to implement the design of the website. You need to code the interface. And in this phase, maybe your design mockups need to be completed in order for you to develop a front end. Then phase five may be testing and debugging. You're testing the website for different bugs. You need to ensure that you have compatibility to different browsers. Any issues you foresee or currently see, you're now fixing it. And then the final may be a launch. That's phase six. You launch your website after your debugging is done, etc. So it's understanding that and what's the different milestones that you want to achieve within a Gantt chart, and that's how you're going to process it and how you're going to create that visual effect. Okay. Sorry, it seems like I am still, okay, there we go. All right, the next one is supply and demand and how this impacts scheduling. So supply and demand basically plays a pretty crucial role when it comes to scheduling. Whether you're in a production environment, manufacturing, logistics, whatever environment you're basically part of, it's a very important role. It directly impacts how you're allocating your resources, how you're planning your production, how you're managing your workforce, and also what promises you're making in terms of delivery timelines to your customers. So, these are some sort of ways in which that supply and demand affects your scheduling. The first one is production scheduling. So basically, if it's a demand-driven production, when the demand is high, your production schedules basically must be adjusted to increase your output, so meaning your final product. If it means you adding more shifts to your workforce, allocating overtime to them, maybe giving them more resources so that you can meet what the demand is for your customer. And on the flip side of that, if your demand is now low, your schedules might be reduced, which means there may be downtime, there may be, say, layoffs, but you may have times where you may not have work available for your resources, and you want to avoid overproduction as much as possible. Inventory management. So if we're looking at it from a just-in-time scheduling, and especially industries that follow just-in-time scheduling, your production schedules itself are very closely aligned with demand in order to minimize your inventory costs. You don't want very high inventory costs. So when your demand increases, your production is then ramped up to meet the needs of your customer. Whereas if there's excess supply, is we try and avoid that in order to reduce wastage, reduce your storage, etc. So that's how you need to then look at it from an inventory management perspective. Workforce scheduling. So with the fluctuating demand when it comes to labor, especially in industries like retail, hospitality, or even logistics, your demand varies based on the time of day, based on the season, or even based on if the fact that there's an event. So your workforce scheduling must be adapted to ensure that you have enough people or enough staff during peak periods like holidays and weekends and special events, etc., so that you avoid overstaffing during off-peak periods. Capacity and resource utilization. So basically, when your demand is high, your scheduling must take into account the use of limited resources like your transportation and workforce, etc. So because this can lead to bottlenecks. So you need adjustments in the schedules to ensure that your constrained work centers or equipments, etc., is utilized as efficiently as possible. Seasonal demand fluctuations. So as I mentioned before, especially from a workforce scheduling perspective, if there is seasons like in the retail industry, for instance, you may increase it, your workforce or, stock even from a replenishment perspective, just a little ahead of holiday season. Whilst if you work in an agricultural sector or construction, you adjust it based on weather. So that will be depending in terms of your demand and your supply. Supply chain disruptions. So if there is disruptions in your supply chain, like let's say a shipment is delayed or you cannot get enough raw materials, so there's a shortage of raw materials, your scheduling will need to be adjusted so that you can accommodate for the lack of materials. You can also accommodate for lack of parts. So if you don't do this, you end up with idle time, you end up with, rescheduling your tasks, etc. Demand forecasting and scheduling. When we look at demand forecasting and scheduling, a lot of your businesses use demand forecasting so that they understand what the future needs are so that they can create a schedule that is as efficient as possible in the business. Like the airline, for instance, they want to be able to create your flight schedules based on what your historic data is. So they're adding more flights during your peak time and reducing them during your low demand times. So it's understanding when, how predictive it can be using historic data. And then we move on to customer service and delivery. So for instance, like in a logistics environment, you adjust your delivery schedules based on the demand. Like for instance, if it's high demand periods, like a Black Friday and Cyber Monday, for instance, more delivery routes are scheduled, more resources are thrown into the mix. When it's off-peak season, you're running on a normal lean fleet or lean management. You're also looking at how can you best prioritize orders. So if you did order something that was overnight, that's prioritized and that's delivered the next day. Or if it's road service, then it's delivered 3-4 days later. It's being sent in a truck. It's not being flown. So understanding where that basically sits in for you. Okay. And I think this should be our last one, yes. So the last one is basically the importance of short-term scheduling. So with short-term scheduling, the focus should be on the immediate allocation of resources and the sequencing of tasks to ensure that your operations run smoothly, efficiently, and in alignment with your customer needs. So this is just some of the key reasons as to why short-term scheduling is important. And the first one is you want to maximize your resource allocation. You want to use your machines and your labor as efficiently as possible. And short-term scheduling allows for you to do that so that they're used to their full capacity, because you are now properly assigning certain tasks to the available resources in a very short period of time, either in a few days or in a few weeks. So you can avoid as much downtime and overloading as possible. You have a smoother production, you have a seamless delivery. So all the good things that come into it just by making sure that your short-term schedule is done properly and you're maximizing those resources as much as possible. The next one is meeting your customer deadlines. You obviously want a schedule being done so that the end goal is you sell your product. So meeting your customer's deadline, it allows for your business to make sure that they meet the tight deadlines that's set by your customer. And if you're adjusting, the schedule to ensure that some of the tasks that you have in your schedule are completed in, correct order and on time, a lot of businesses can deliver your products on time, which is good for maintaining a decent customer service or customer satisfaction. It also gives you a competitive edge and competitive advantage in the marketplace. Also, when we look at meeting customer deadlines, especially if there's a rush order or an urgent order from a customer, which can happen, your short-term scheduling, due to it being flexible, you can rearrange priorities. You can, you can use the resources that you have and prioritize the ones that you need to. So you can respond to those immediate customer needs. You don't have to disrupt a lot of your planned activities because it's quite flexible. Minimizing any operational cost. So you want to reduce as much idle time as possible. If you're not properly scheduling in the short term, some of your resources, it can end up waiting for other tasks to be completed. So if you have 5 steps in your production process, you don't want step 2 waiting a long period of time for step 1 to be completed. So you want to try and have as limited idle time as possible. So you want to basically have continuous productive work or engaging in productive work so that you have less downtime, less operational cost. Improving your workflow efficiency. So optimal task sequencing is part of this. So especially in a production environment, the order in which the tasks are completed can actually impact your efficiency. So your short-term scheduling focuses on sequencing those tasks in the most efficient way that it can possibly go, making sure that your dependent tasks are completed in the right order so that you avoid any sort of delays. So your Gantt chart helps you with that because there is overlaps in your Gantt chart and it allows for the dependency to be highlighted. So you understand which process is now dependent on another process and what process needs to be finished in order for another process to now begin. And then the last one is to enhance flexibility. So you want to adapt as much as possible to uncertainty. Uncertainty happens. We have seen uncertainty happen in the last few years. So your scheduling in short term basically needs to respond to any sort of immediate changes, whether a machine breaks down, whether people don't pitch up for work, or whether your customer now either demands less or demands more. You need to be able to be flexible in this regard. So if you are quite rigid in terms of what your scheduling is, and from a long-term perspective, your business may suffer because of these unexpected events. But if you are flexible and you have short-term planning, it allows for your business to adjust the plan pretty quickly. Like in the logistics environment, I think I've mentioned before, I sit in Durban. My scheduling is quite short-term, which means that if something does happen, I'm quickly able to pick up the phone and say, okay, don't do this, do that. And we can expedite it. But if you work in an environment where your schedule is very long-term, and I'm talking long-term as in years, it's very difficult to make it a flexible plan. So anything that comes on board at a fairly quickly rate that is unexpected and is uncertain, you're not able to change that up very quickly. So you want to be as flexible as possible in order for you to have a successful and optimized workflow and processes, and short-term scheduling helps you to do that. So I hope this was informative to you. I will upload the slides as well as the recording by tomorrow, as well as your session or your learning unit 8. And then we just have one more learning unit to do, which will be next week. And then we will do our national support session thereafter. But I hope all of you have a fabulous day. You're working on your ICE Task 4. Have that submitted by 23:59 today. Any outstanding ICE tasks will please be submitted by latest tomorrow, meaning your ICE tasks 1, 2, and 3. Yeah, we'll chat soon regarding your national support session on your final POE. If there is any tricks and tricks I can bring into play, I 100% will, and we'll share that by the 31st of October. So have a fantastic day, and we will chat soon. Thank you.